It was a bright and breezy Saturday morning when 15-year-old twins Paul and Jerry arrived at the old campsite near Pine Ridge Forest. Their father, Detective Mark Gray, had been excited to take them on this trip for weeks. The boys had no idea that this camping trip would turn into something far more dangerous than a simple weekend getaway. As they set up their tent by the bubbling creek, Paul looked around with curiosity. He was the quieter of the two, always observant and often lost in his thoughts. Jerry, on the other hand, was the more energetic twin, always cracking jokes and looking for excitement. "Hey, Paul, check out that guy over there," Jerry whispered, pointing toward a man near a neighboring campsite. The man was tall, wearing a long, dark coat, even though it was warm, and he kept glancing over his shoulder. Paul squinted. "He looks suspicious." "Suspicious? It's just a guy in a coat. You're always overthinking things." But Paul couldn't shake the feeling. Something about the man seemed off. Their father, Mark Gray, turned and followed their gaze. Don't know him, but stay alert. This place can be full of surprises." They finished setting up their campsite, and as the sun dipped below the trees, they gathered around the campfire with other campers. Everyone seemed friendly, but there was an odd energy in the air. The man in the coat was sitting on a log, eyes darting around as if waiting for something.
That night, after praying with their father, the twins lay in their sleeping bags. The sounds of the forest were strangely muted. There were no owls hooting or leaves rustling in the wind. Just silence. Suddenly, Jerry's eyes flickered open. He gently rubbed his eyes. Glancing at his sleeping brother, he suddenly had this urge to check it out himself, but his fear got the best of him. "Paul," he barely whispered, shaking him violently. Jerry's eyes are wide open, sweat running down his face when he heard a loud thud. "Did you hear that?" he whispered to Paul. Paul was already awake, staring at the silhouette of the man in the coat standing near the edge of the campsite. He was muttering something, too quiet for them to hear clearly. "Let's go see what he's up to," Paul suggested, pulling his jacket on. "I don't know, Paul. Dad told us to stay in the tent." But Jerry could sense the thrill of the mystery in the air, and before his brother could protest further, he slipped out of the tent. They crept past the other sleeping campers, careful to make no sound. As they got closer, they could see the man standing still, his eyes scanning the darkness of the woods. Then they noticed something even stranger, a shadow moving between the trees. It wasn't an animal. It was another person. "Did you see that?" Paul asked, gripping his brother's arm. "Yeah. Who's out there?" Jerry whispered back. The man in the coat suddenly turned toward them, his face hidden in the darkness, but his voice was unmistakable. "You shouldn't be out here." The twins froze, caught off guard. "What are you doing?" Paul demanded, trying to sound braver than he felt. "I'm watching. You need to go back to your tent, now." The man's tone was cold and commanding, leaving no room for argument. The twins hesitated. They had never been this close to someone who seemed so mysterious and dangerous. Before they could react, the man turned sharply and disappeared into the forest, blending into the shadows as if he had never been there. "That was weird," Jerry muttered. "We need to tell Dad," Paul said, his voice urgent. The next morning, Paul couldn't shake the image of the mysterious man. He looked at his brother still sleeping under a thick blanket. He stared at the window, hearing the commotion outside. From inside, he could hear the nervous chatter of the campers. Paul overheard that they were talking about an older woman that was missing. "Where could she have gone?" Paul said while scratching his chin. "Who are you talking about?" Jerry whispered while rubbing his eyes. "We need to investigate," Paul said, determined. "We can't let another person disappear." "Investigate who?" Jerry said, crossing his arms. "One of the campers went missing. I know that man from last night was really suspicious," Paul quips. Meanwhile, their father, Detective Mark Gray, had already started asking questions, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. "You two see anything unusual last night?" he asked the twins, a flicker of concern passing over his face. "We saw the man in the coat," Paul said quickly. He was talking to someone in the woods, and then he told us to go back to our tent. Their father's expression darkened. That's the second strange thing I've heard today. The woman who's missing. Her name is Lisa. Last night I saw her talking to a man in a coat near the same spot. We need to find her, but something tells me there's more going on here. The twins exchanged a look. What do you mean? Jerry asked, stepping closer. Last night, I found traces of something strange near her campsite. I'm not sure what it is yet, but I'm going to find out. You two stay sharp. Dad, can we go with you, please? Jerry said without hesitation, boldness in his eyes. Yes, Dad. We want to make sure you're okay, Paul added. Mark Gray looked deep at his son's eyes. He knows that they were curious and adventurous like him. His worried look is palpable, and the twins knew exactly what their father was thinking. But before he could open his mouth, the twins ran ahead of him. Hey, wait! Yelled Mark Gray. Don't worry, Dad. We're going to be okay. We promise. They smiled and winked mischievously. The twins set off into the woods with their father, determined to find any clues about Lisa's disappearance. As they walked deeper into the trees, the air grew colder, and the silence from the night before returned. We need to go further, Paul said, his instincts telling him they were close. Jerry looked at him seriously. Wait, Paul, remember what Mom used to say? When in a difficult situation, and when we don't know what to do, we should pray and ask God for his guidance. Mark Gray nodded. That's right, son. Let's ask God to show us where to go. Lord, please help us find Lisa, whispered Mark Gray, and protect us from any harm. Amen? They followed the narrow trail in front of them. They stumbled upon an abandoned campsite, hidden deep in the woods. Old rusted tools lay scattered on the ground, and a half-burned fire crackled weakly. But what caught their attention was the symbol carved into a nearby tree, an odd, circular design that Paul couldn't quite place. Look at this, he said, pointing at the mark. Jerry leaned closer. What does it mean? Before Paul could answer, they heard a rustling in the bushes. They froze. A figure emerged from the shadows, the man in the coat. What do you want from us? Jerry demanded. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, his face now illuminated in the dim light. He had a cold, calculating gaze, like a predator sizing up its prey. I've been waiting for you, he said, his voice low and chilling. You're meddling in something much bigger than you can understand. Suddenly, a noise came from behind them. Paul and Jerry spun around, and there, emerging from the trees, was Lisa, the missing camper, looking wild-eyed and disheveled. Get away from me, she screamed, backing up. They're coming. You don't understand. Before she could explain, the man in the coat lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. No, Paul shouted, running to her. Jerry grabbed a branch from the ground and swung it at the man. Let her go. The man released Lisa just as Paul tackled him to the ground, his adrenaline surging. Jerry helped pull the man off his brother. Just as they did, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, and figures emerged from the woods. More people, all wearing dark clothing and heading toward them. Run, Mark Gray shouted, pulling the twins toward the tree line. Catching their breath, Paul and Jerry ran as fast as they can without looking. Mark Gray and Lisa were behind them. Keep running, Mark Gray instructed the twins. He gasped, catching his breath, praying for their safety. Lisa, on the other hand, was panicking, gripping tightly in Mark's arm. We're almost there. Don't stop running, Mark Gray said, ignoring the stabbing pain on his legs. The family barely escaped the pursuing figures, racing back toward the campsite. Lisa had explained that the strange people in the woods were part of a secretive group involved in illegal activities, using the forest as a cover for their operations. She had been kidnapped after discovering their plans. With the evidence the twins had gathered, Mark Gray called for backup. Within hours, the campsite was surrounded by police, and the strange group was apprehended. The missing campers were found, safe but shaken, and the authorities discovered the illegal activities that had been happening in the forest. As they packed up to leave, Paul glanced at Jerry. That was close, but I think we just solved the mystery. Jerry grinned. You bet we did. Not bad for a couple of teenagers, huh? Mark Gray chuckled, clapping them both on the back. You two did great. I'm proud of you. And one more thing. Please don't say anything to your mother about this. Mark said, his tone is serious. You don't want your mom to worry, right? The twins nodded, knowing the severity of the situation. Sure, Dad, they said in unison. The twins exchanged a look, the thrill of the adventure still buzzing in their veins. This camping trip had turned into something unforgettable, and a mystery they would never forget. As they drove away from the campsite, Paul and Jerry knew that wherever they went next, adventure would follow.
Welcome to our channel, Youth on the Rock. Jesus is the rock. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel.